Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes Mr. Gosar for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this important hearing, and thank you for our witnesses for appearing as well. I want to be clear. Despite claims in witness testimonies, government cannot deputize the private sector for actions that would be otherwise be restricted by the Constitution. In this case, the censorship of lawful speech. Now I want to direct you to a tweet over my shoulder sent by President Trump on October 5th, 2020, before Twitter banned him from the platform. This was after President Trump had become infected with COVID and received treatment at Walter Reed Medical Center. It says in part, "Don't be afraid of COVID. Don't let it dominate your life," end of quote. Do you see that, Mr. Roth?
Yes, sir, I do.
Less than an hour later, you received an email from James Baker at Twitter, reproduced behind me as well, saying, quote, "Why isn't this POTUS tweet a violation of our COVID-19 policy, especially the don't be afraid COVID statement," end of quote. Isn't that correct, Mr. Roth?
Yes, I believe that's the email displayed.
Now, Mr. Baker, was it your understanding that the Twitter COVID-19 policy was people should be afraid of COVID?
Sir, my recollection.
Yes or no?
Could you repeat the question, sir?
Was it your understanding that Twitter's COVID-19 policy was, quote, people should be afraid of COVID? Yeah.
At that point in time, I did not fully understand what Twitter's COVID misinformation policy was, and
Okay.
so I was trying to understand.
I'm recapturing my time. So maybe you thought that Twitter's policy was that it should dominate people's lives. Is that what you thought?
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard
The
time
other
hearing
part.
you, sir.
So is it the fact that Twitter, don't let it dominate people's lives? Is that the problem with the tweet?
At that point in time, I did not understand fully. I was relatively new at Twitter, and I was trying to understand what the policy was, and therefore I was.
I just want to ask you, the other two were asked, where did you go to medical school?
I beg your pardon?
Where did you go to medical school?
I did not go to medical
Very
school.
good. Now, I'd like to have a yes or no from each of the witnesses on these following questions. Did you or others at Twitter communicate with government officials by means of disappearing messaging systems like Signal, Snapchat, or Wicker? Mr. Baker, yes or no?
Have I ever communicated with a government official using those?
Yes or no?
I don't recall.
Ms. Gaddy?
Not to the best of my
Mr.
recollection.
Roth?
Yes.
Mr. Rowley?
Not to my recollection, no.
Once again, did you or others at Twitter receive requests from federal law enforcement to allow criminal activity or content whose distribution is criminal to proceed on Twitter? Mr. Baker?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question, sir.
Ms. Gaddy?
Can you please repeat the question, sir?
Mr. Roth?
If I understood the question correctly, it was whether we received requests to allow unlawful activity, and
Yes.
the answer is no.
Okay, Ms. Navaroli?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Now, I'd like to submit for the record an article by the New York Post titled, quote, "Twitter refused to remove child porn because it didn't violate policies." Ms. Gaddy, who was involved in this determination?
I'm not familiar with this situation.
Mr. Roth, are you familiar with it?
No, sir, I'm not.
Once again, I'd like a yes or no from each of the witnesses. Did you apply labels to users with an administrative tool to downrank them? Mr. Baker?
I'm sorry, sir. I'm having a very hard time hearing your questions.
Ms. Gaddy?
I'm having the same problem, sir. Can you please repeat the question?
Mr. Roth?
I'm not sure I understood the question, sir.
Well, I'm asking you, did anybody use an administrative tool to downrank users?
Yes, sir, that's a part of Twitter's content moderation capabilities.
Mr. Baker?
Well, I'll rely on Mr. Roth.
Okay, Ms. Gaddy?
Yes, we're very public about our recommendation system
Thank
and how
you.
they work.
Mr. Chairman, today's witnesses played a central, powerful, and disturbing role in limiting not only free speech, but even people's good faith inquiries and research regarding their own health. The Internet is increasingly where my constituents go to engage in civic discourse. Our liberties as Americans will be diminished if we do not recognize our speech is increasingly virtual and right now subject to hostility and threatened through bans and deplatforming. The suggestions by witnesses that all of the removal of, quote, lawful but awful speech, quote, was done in favor of users is bunk. You could just as easily provide content filter options to allow lawful speech, letting users decide what lawful materials they do or don't want to engage with. But you didn't. You censored and manipulated millions of people. Do not allow people like this sitting in front of us today to be the arbiters of truth. I urge my colleagues to support my Section 230 reform, Stop the Censorship Act, which empowers users with the editorial contract. Our private businesses, you always have a contract with your customers. Allow them to pick. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Balin.